Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is an unusual video in as much as it's not a putting down video, but a warning video, I suppose. I thought I'd do a brain dump on Oncidiums and the Intergenerics that come into the Oncidium Alliance. I do get a lot of questions about these orchids, and a lot of them are geared up to, I've got this particular Oncidium and it doesn't seem to be doing very well. Well, in amongst them are some difficult orchids. Now I'm going to have to use pop-ups for this because I haven't got, apart from the twinkles, I haven't got any Oncidiums in bloom at the moment, but I've got pictures of ones that I've got. First thing to get out of the way is Tolumnias. They used to be classed as a type of Oncidium. So equitant Oncidiums, I believe, was their sort of phrase, but now they have their own category. But nonetheless, they are still related to Oncidiums. But those don't grow like normal Oncidiums. There's a lot of Oncidiums that need to stay moist, and certainly in the growing season they're real drinkers. Well, these aren't. These are twig epiphytes. They grow on twigs. They very rarely grow in anything. They grow on things. So you keep the roots soggy on those, they probably won't make it. So those are an exception. But what I'll do is, the variety of the Oncidium Alliance is quite vast, but I'm going to start at what I call the strong end, and that's the Brassicas. Now these are strong, vigorous plants. You need room as well, not only for the size of some of the plants, but also the length and size of the spikes. I mean, I've seen Brassica spikes over 5 feet long, absolutely smothered in blooms, you know. So they can go big, but nonetheless, they're easy to grow. They come into the same category as all Oncidiums. If you're going to repot them, you've got several reasons for a repot on an orchid. Specifically the Oncidium Alliance. One, the media is breaking down and it's rubbish. Get the plant out of it. Doesn't matter what stage of growth it's in, you'll do more harm leaving it in there than you will taking it out. Second reason, it's totally outgrown its pot. Now I've found that the Oncidium Alliance like to be tight in their pots. So don't worry too much if your pot looks too small. The problem you'll have is keeping the plants standing upright, because you know they can get very top heavy, and certainly in smaller plastic plots you've only got to look at them and they fall over. But you can stand them in something else. Just make sure that you know, the pot itself can still get some airflow around it, especially at the bottom where your ventilation holes are. You know, if you bung that up, it's not so good. I mean, I do it, you know, I do it for the sake of the plants below. So, but if you look, I'll see if I can turn this one upside down. Yeah, there's a rim round the bottom of the pot with gaps in it. So the air can still get underneath that pot, whatever it's stood in. And it's an air cone, so extra air getting in at the base. But if that was stood on there like that, there'd be excellent airflow. Putting it on a drip tray stops the plants underneath getting drips down in the leaf joints and stuff like this. It's winter time, it's cool. You know, I don't want water in my leaf joints this time of year for sure. In the summer I don't mind so much. But yeah, so Brassicas are a good choice. Then you've got what I call the pure Oncidiums. Now I'll put some flowers up. There is a look about an Oncidium bloom, yeah? Especially like the dancing lady types. There is a look about them. And these tend to be quite vigorous in the main. They're not bad growers, but they're a little more fussy on their repot time. And you do really need, like with most orchids, to wait till you see new growth, new roots coming from the plant. It doesn't matter where those new roots are coming from. They might not necessarily be coming from your latest new growth. They might be coming from the growth before. But that's what to watch for. Watch for those new roots. And wait till they're about an inch or so long. You can go earlier if you like. But the earlier you repot with the signs of the new growth, the more chance you've got of knocking them off during the repotting process. They are very fragile when they are early in their stage of development. Once they get over an inch or so, they're pretty reasonably robust, but they can still snap. You've still got to take care, but then you always have to take care. So within that particular group, there are some good ones, and they do have a look about them. Right, now I'll put some pop-ups up of a different look, and this is deliberate because if you've got some that have this sort of look about them, you can almost guarantee that they've got odontoglossum in them. And as soon as that encroaches on an intergeneric, it will turn it into a cooler grower in the main. One that is far less tolerant of heat, and if you can't avoid the heat, it's going to need really good airflow to try and cool the leaves down and generally keep that plant a bit cooler. Now it goes across the board with Oncidiums. They all like good airflow. They like air movement. They don't like stale air, static air. And they also like some humidity. But quite a lot of them are quite tolerant of that, so they will grow in your home. I mean, you know, no orchids are desert plants as far as I know, so, you know, really, really low humidity is not going to do any orchid any good. But some are more tolerant than others. I mean, the good old Phalaenopsis will put up with quite dry air, you know, as long as it's kept hydrated from the root's end and it's got some. Otherwise you're onto a loser. But yeah, reasonable humidity. Doesn't have to be ridiculously high. You don't have to get up into the 80-90% like some orchids. You know, you can stay around the 50 to 60% and they'll probably be happy. A little bit of airflow. And with the odontum, once odontoglossum gets included, you will need to, you know, really think about keeping the humidity up and trying to keep them a bit cooler. Now, light-wise with Oncidium, some of them will take incredibly bright there, my mouth won't work, bright light. I'd avoid direct sun when it's high in the sky. You know, in other normal growing season type sun is a bit fierce. But if gently acclimatized, some of them will take it, but some won't. So you've got to go careful. And unfortunately with Oncidium leaves, if you burn them, they're a goner because they are relatively fragile compared with some others. And that's a bit of a conflict because you sort of look at Cattleya leaves, big, thick, strong, strappy things like that. They will burn easier than flimsy little Oncidium leaves, believe it or not. So it's a matter of their tolerance. Now, I find that during my winter times with the low temperatures, my Oncidiums do better if they're allowed to dry. Not for long, but just get that media dry, especially as a lot of my Oncidiums are in smaller bark with sphagnum moss, so they do stay moist quite a long time in the winter. So I leave them, let them get dry, and then water them gently. Not an absolute soaking, gently. Just get them medium wet. And then head for dry again. Now in the summertime, you've got a job to give them too much water. As long as they've got a good root system, they're drinkers. They love to be hydrated. And the reason is they've got quite a fast transpiration rate because of the size and the type of leaves they've got. So the water coming in at the bottom end goes up through the plant and comes out through the top end relatively quickly compared with some other orchids. So they need a lot of moisture at the base when they're growing in the growing season. So anyway, I'll put a couple more blooms up and we'll have a think about those. Now these types you can almost definitely say have got Brassia in there. It's that spidery look, yeah? But depending on the patterning, they could also have odontoglossum in there, which makes them less heat tolerant, yeah? They do like to be cooler. So with the intergenerics, that you'll have a hell of a job to find out, you know, the original species that went in there. A hell of a job. So it's guesswork, but the blooms are a good clue. There is a definitive shape for an Oncidium pure that may only be hybridized with other Oncidiums. So it is a hybrid, but it's still an Oncidium. And a lot of those are getting reclassified into unusual, obscure names that you can't even pronounce now. But you can usually find out what they were called before that happened. Those are the ones that are the easiest to grow. They're heat tolerant, providing they've got some humidity, and they're vigorous. They're pretty good. So they're pretty easy going. As soon as you get to those ones with this pattern on, you're looking at an inclusion of Odontoglossum to one extent or another. Now, it might only be a third of the plant's makeup, but it'll still have an effect on it. It'll still make it sensitive to repotting, not too heat tolerant. It'll object. They just stop growing if they get too warm. That's their objection. They just stop growing. So they stall. So they lose their vigor effectively if you can't keep them a bit cooler. And then you get onto this type that have obviously got a reasonable amount of brassia in them. They should be vigorous. They should be easier to grow. That's really the advice with the Oncidium Intergenerics. And there are so many, and most of the ones you see for sale have got some silly name that's basically made up, like Cambria, or it might just say Orchid. And therein lies your problem. You've lost your culture guide by losing the origins of the plant, when it was first hybridized. And these intergenerics, they're multiple crosses. They often start with two Oncidium species crossed together to get a hybrid. That will then be crossed with, say, an Odontoglossum crossed with an Oncidium. They'll bring that in, and then they'll cross it with a brassia that may be a hybrid, and then they'll take all that lot and cross it back with another species. You can't keep track of all that lot. It's not possible. So the only guide you've got is the look of the plant, and quite honestly, nearly all the Oncidiums look incredibly similar. They just have a look about them. Even the little twinkles have still got that look. You've got eggy-shaped pseudobulbs, normally with a couple of leaves coming out from the base of the pseudobulb and some sticking out the top. But, you can go from this size to this size, and that's just the bulbs. Yeah? So some of them do grow big. Yeah, so, some take a bit of accommodating, especially if you're growing in the home. And if you grow them in the home, then I can safely say they do need pretty good light. But watch that growing season sun through glass. It can be a bit fierce. They'll probably need some shading of some sort during the summer months. Don't go too mad with the light. If you err on the side of caution, your leaves will start looking a little darker than perhaps they should be. That's the giveaway. If they start going a pale yellow colour, you may be overdoing the light, but it could just be an old leaf that's dying off. You never know. Anyway, that's my take on Oncidiums. Very rewarding, and some of them have, not necessarily large blooms, but make up for it in the sheer weight of numbers and the size of the spikes. Practically every colour you can think of, apart from the blues. And, in that Oncidium Alliance, you've got the brassias, you've got the miltonias, you've got the miltoniopsis. Now, they're not so easy. I class those as not easy orchids. But some people just grow them like weeds. Makes you sick, doesn't it? You've got the true Oncidiums, you've got what were Odontoglossums. There's a hell of a range in this alliance. And as such, a hell of a range of plant sizes, leaf sizes, bulb sizes, and bloom sizes and shapes and colours. So it is a rewarding alliance to get into. So there we go, some hints and culture tips. Temperature-wise, a lot of the Oncidium species grow quite warm, or can. They don't have to, but they can, so that they can be quite heat tolerant. As I've said before, the Odontoglossums like to be cooler. In the main, they come from an environment more like a montane forest, so cool and moist with air movement. And as soon as you introduce those into an alliance or a hybrid, you do that to it, to one extent or another. So yeah, a little bit about Oncidiums, and as I said, I've had to use pop-ups because apart apart from the twinkles, and I can't emphasise enough how rewarding twinkles are. They're not large blooms, not by any shape, but it's the sheer number of them, and they're all fragrant to one extent or another, and it's not all the same fragrance. They do vary from vanilla to sort of honey vanilla. I mean, I've got one that smells chocolate vanilla. So they do vary, but you have to bear in mind most of them are quite compact, easy-going plants. I think I said once you can never have enough twinkles. But if you look at the parent, if you're going to get one of the parents, Sotoanum, you're going to need some room. This can grow pretty big and get tangled up with all the Vanda roots. Yeah. Anyway, a chat about Oncidiums. I don't normally do that sort of thing. There's a bit of care in there, a bit of environmental controls in there, and some pretty pictures to look at as we went along. So I don't do these sort of videos very often, but it's just a culmination of questions over a period of time that have just made me think perhaps I ought to just go over what I do about growing Oncidiums. And I have got a lot, you know. I mean, that sea of green up there is mainly Oncidiums to one degree or another. Okay, there's a Cattleya up there, there's an Epidendrum, there's a couple of Dendrobiums up the back, but there's a lot of Oncidiums there. A lot of these are Oncidium types. Some down here, that's the rescue ones down the bottom. So there's quite a few lurking around. Another twinkle over here, you know, and they are dotted around as well. They're not all in the same place. I mean, this one up here is a notorious non-bloomer, and that's Miltonia flavescens. It's a species. It's growing incredibly well, but the flipping thing just won't bloom. It's now under the light. It's now under the grow light and near the glass. You know, I always say if you get a non-bloomer, the first thing to try is more light, because that's the easy bit. What should be. And if that don't work, then you have to start thinking again. Perhaps it's too warm, perhaps it's too cold. But I always go for let's bump the light up first and see what happens. And we may get some blooms on that one day. Yeah, I'll leave it at that, and I'll see you next time. Do the questions in the comments. I'm quite happy. Saying I've got this particular intergeneric probably isn't going to be very good for me, because unless I've actually got it, I won't know much about it. But nonetheless, you can do quite general advice on the Oncidium intergenerics that in the main can sort of go across the board, but there are specifics in there where some advice could just be fundamentally wrong, you know. So it does pay to know the individual orchids as best you can, which is often difficult. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.